Hi everyone, buongiorno. Welcome to the panel, and in the interest of time, I would start introducing people already. We have Tina Lee, very insightful tarot card reader and editor-in-chief with Unbias News. Mercy Abang, a super flexible dancer and the managing director of Unbias News. Wafaa Albadry, style icon and editor with Unbias News. I'm Ankita Anand, editor and head of partnerships with Unbias News. And today we are going to talk about nepotism in the media, right? Okay, the correct topic is media as an extractive practice, tackling the Western media's effect on Global South journalism. Tina, before we dive into the details, could you talk about what does it mean when we say extractive practice?
Yeah, I think that, we have a journalism network called Hostwriter, which has 6,000 members in 153 countries all over the world. So our whole motivation is to get journalists to collaborate across borders. And one of the things that we noticed as we've been promoting that collaboration for years is that how these partnerships are sometimes unequal. And unequal on many different levels. Unequal from the level of major newsrooms and the way that they can treat journalists, particularly from the Global South, in different ways than they would treat journalists from their own newsroom, the way that people work with fixers, even among colleagues from the same countries or the same places, but also the gender dynamics that can happen within a team. So what we think is really important is that for within the journalism community, that people are in equal partnerships and have the chance to equally benefit from the same amount of hard work, but also that the communities that we enter to listen to their stories, to tell their problems, are not in a situation where they give those problems to us and we benefit from them greatly by getting awards, by getting paid for the story, by having other people read it and getting this kind of fame that you can get from telling a really difficult story, but that the people in the communities are also benefiting from having their stories told. They're able to also learn who are the people to blame. So we think that this idea of an extractive practice is a really good one, and we published an article by Nampa Shivute last year on this subject, where they also drew the line between the extractive practices that have been very prominent in climate, in the way that particularly communities from the Global South were mined for precious goods and then abandoned, where they also did not benefit from these riches. And that this story of underdevelopment intentionally also echoes today in the way that journalism is practiced, sometimes, not always. But this is what we want to fight against at Unbiased News, and what we think more generally people should be conscious of in their reporting is how to make journalism actually beneficial for the communities that we report on instead of extracting things from them for our own gain in a way that actually doesn't end up benefiting them at all.
Mercy, there is extraction amongst journalists of the Global South and North, but there is another kind of practice that I'm hearing about from my colleagues, which is editors in Western outlets asking for a joint byline because they've edited the piece. So what's your take on that?
I mean, I think that if you contribute to the cooking pot, it's only fair that you get a byline to the cooking pot. That's just my most simplistic take on that. However, we've seen cases where journalists, or as some legacy media outlets call them fixers, contribute to stories and they never get bylines. For me, that's a concern. I can literally close my eyes and list some stories that I have contributed on that I never got a byline for them. These are award-winning stories on international media platforms. Nobody thought it was important for me to get a byline. So the layers to the extraction is extremely, invasive in a way where, from the post-colonial era, we can see that, there are extractions where artifacts were taken up from communities, mining's happening, and you can never trace down, who took what and how. And now we're having conversations of returning them back, and people are arguing over it. And you can link that to the extraction in the media industry as well. People come, journalists from the the North, fly into the South, take off stories, work with fixers, quote and unquote, because we don't like using those words, because a journalist is a journalist. And the fixers works with you 10 days, sometimes 12 days, sometimes 1 month. And you're done with your piece, you file it, go back to London, with all respect to everyone who flies in from London from here. And, the story is an award-winning one. It's never published in a local media. The local journalist who contributed to it is not seen, is not heard, is not reported about, never gets a byline. The community is completely cut off. The language of the reportage is completely off, because even in the language of communicating about these constituents, it matters a lot. So I feel like that is the point where, it's concerning, not necessarily about would you get byline on what? Because then we are saying that if you work on a story, you shouldn't get a byline. If you worked in a TV station, where I used to work in TV, a scriptwriter gets a byline, right? End credits, you see it rolls down. And I think we should also replicate that in all parts of media. If you contribute to a story, you do deserve a byline. The concern is where people who contribute to a process are not acknowledged, absolutely erased. There's an erasure to that process. And I think that's a concern.
And to speak to the cooking pot idea, Unbiased News mentions the editors separately, the author is separate, and then there's the illustrator, right?
Yeah, we also insist that everyone that works on a story is mentioned and gets a byline. We've had situations where people said, oh, this person doesn't need to be on it because they're just working on a fixer. And we say, okay, well, you can call them a fixer, but they're going to get paid the same amount as you are, and they're going to get a byline next to yours. So are they still a fixer now? Do you still want to work? And often that shuts it down.
Wafaa, sometimes local journalists from the global south or the majority world pitch a story to an international outlet. The story is liked. And then the editor says, we are going to do the story only when you agree to our journalists going there and working with you. What's your take?
First, before I start to speak about this, I want to send a message of solidarity to all our colleagues who are being laid off recently from international media outlets across the world, and especially those who are based or immigrated for these jobs. So, first of all, and then, well, actually, this is one of the best cases. It's the best of the worst that they actually offer you to even get a byline with them. Sometimes you send the pitch to the international outlet and they say, oh, it's a great story, but we don't have the capacity to do it now. And later, a week later or something, they send their own correspondence to do it. However, it's your idea, it's your pitch, it's everything. And maybe you will see it online and they will say, yeah, probably when you pitched that, we didn't have the capacity, but all of a sudden, today we have it, and we started to do the story. So this is happening all the time, especially also when there are big events are going on in certain countries, which they are calling it most of the times developed countries, or they are, like the Western international media is constructing this narrative of we need this very progressive perspective from them to tell our stories. Yeah, so it happens when there's a big event, like we see, for example, talking about Sudan. Some years ago, I was offering to hire and to talk about Sudan, and the answer was always like, who wants to hear about Sudan? Where is actually Sudan? Is it I was like, yeah, it's the country after Egypt, and it's a very important country because of the sources, etc. But now Sudan is very important, and apparently not so many journalists are having the background knowledge. So what is happening in this case? Parachute journalism, which is another way of extracting the knowledge and the background of the journalists working there and making them appear as fixers. However, they are actually giving their real story. So this practice is happening, unfortunately, all the time, and it also plays a little bit into the confidence of the journalists the local journalists. Because, for example, also in our Sinking Cities project or in our other projects where we work with local journalists, we needed to boost the confidence of the local journalists and tell them you can actually report by your own. We give you mentorship, we give you resources, whatever we can do, we will help you for you to do your best story. And we are editors, we are here to mentor you and to help you. And this is, of course, not the practice that is happening most of the time from the mainstream media. You are, even if you are well achieved and you reach to pitch a story and it is accepted and you're promised to get the byline, maybe, your editor is not giving you the full trust to write the story your way, right? So this is also another way of draining the local journalists from their confidence to tell their own stories.
Tina, we received pitches where people offered that they are going to travel to another country and report from there. They were not local journalists. What was your editorial response to that?
Yeah, so when we opened the call for pitches for Unbias the News, the first time that we opened it up, we were trying to do it very differently. We had just come out of the experience of COVID, where also as a journalism network, we had for years known that there's this big, actually huge amount of local journalists all over the world that are phenomenal and that are very, very underutilized. And we often saw the situation where rather than work with someone, let's say from Brazil, who's an excellent journalist in Brazil, that you rather send your own reporter from Germany to Brazil to report on the election. So when COVID happened, we were like, bingo, they're not going to be able to travel. Finally, all of these major newsrooms are going to need to actually utilize local journalists. And we thought, okay, we can really help here because they don't know them, we can help them to connect. But what happened was when they started to ask us for journalists in different countries is that they would still say, oh, but do you know them? And I would go, no, they're a member of our network. Here's a list of their publications. You can see right here and right here and right here. But if they haven't published in The Guardian before, they haven't published in The Washington Post or The New York Times, it's still this thing, do you know them? And I kept saying, what do you mean, do I know them? They're in my network. No, I don't know them personally. I know their work. I know who they are. I mean, I know my brother. I don't think that he's a good journalist. Like, knowing someone is not necessarily, should that be the thing? But then I turned it around one point. Do you guys only hire people that you know? Really? And I didn't realize that. I actually genuinely thought when you saw calls for pitches online that was open to everybody, and that if you had a really good pitch and a really good history of cool writing, that you had a chance to get that. I didn't actually realize that they're only hiring people that they know at a lot of these big newsrooms, people that already did fellowships with them, people that already published with them, people that know somebody else. So we were really disheartened to find this out. So when we did this call for pitches, we said, okay, we're going to do this differently. We are not going to expressly, we're not working with people that we know. Expressly, we're not considering where your bylines were before. We're going to look at the work and look at the pitch, and this is what we're going to consider. And as a result, we got pitches from all over the world, and quite a few of them were also people who said, I'm in London and I have a really great story from Turkey. Or, I'm in America, or Canada, I have a really great story from Haiti. So we said, okay, we're going to consider the quality of the pieces that they've already submitted, the work that they've already done, the quality of the pitch, and we're also going to look at, is this the best person to tell the story? So we asked them to say, what makes you the right person or the best person to tell this story? And I don't necessarily think that someone in a foreign country automatically is not the right person to tell a story about a different country, but they aren't automatically the right person either, right? So even when there was some really interesting stories, we would say, okay, so you're in London, but you want to report about this local community in Turkey. So what makes you the right person to do this? And in the case, for example, where someone's a member of that diaspora and they really have, this is a passionate story they've been wanting to tell, there's no one else that can really do it like they can do, we still consider it. I think there is room in situations where, for instance, parachute journalism is also appropriate. For instance, when your country has had a huge impact on another country and you need your country to know what kind of situation you've had. In our book Unbias the News, for example, Daniel Bates reported about how in Haiti, the actions of Oxfam were really outrageous. And in this case, it's very relevant that the people in the country where Oxfam is based, and Oxfam has reformed, of course, and I'm not using them as an example of a bad practice, but it would have been important in that case that the people in the UK understood what had been happening there. But often it is not the case that you are the best person to tell a story about a country that you don't live in just automatically. Also, when we want to save emissions, guys, why are we flying to other countries when there's local journalists right there?
I wanted also to add to this, Tina, like sometimes a colleague from Europe or from the US travels to anywhere in the global south for a week, and then when they come back, they are suddenly experts on this area, and we live there for many, like we live in our global south for many years, and we get educated there, and we travel to Europe also for many years, and stay there for many years, and we are immigrants, and we know the language and everything, but yet we are not trusted enough to report about these places, right?
Yeah, because then you're biased.
I'm biased, and also, again, it's a matter of trust.
Yeah.
And they don't trust, like me reporting about Ethiopia while my country of origin is having a political thing with Ethiopia that made me, by default, inadequate to report about the matter. However, actually, if we look at it in a good way, well, every country that once upon a time colonize my country is not adequate at all to report about it in a neutral way or in an unbiased way. So it's again, it's a matter of trust. And if I may add also, but you can ask your question before I go on.
Okay, I actually wanted to ask you, Mercy Abang. You have reported from Nigeria for a global audience, and sometimes when we are reporting local stories, there is this tussle with editors internationally where they say that we have to flatten out a lot of these details to make it palatable to a global audience. And that leads to a complete loss of nuance, also factual inaccuracy. You want to comment on that?
Why do I have to do this always when I speak? Thank you, Ankita. I just think that, so I don't, keep calling out the concerns that we're already aware of, I don't think that this is out of place because it's deliberate, it's intentional. And it is intentional because of when you look at power dynamics, it is meant to report they, them, the global north and the south. So in the reportage, the same way we talk about autocrats playbook, I think there is also one for the media, how certain people are reported, and it also tells a lot on how we are seen. If I walk into a hall as a black person, you first see me as a black person. You don't see me as Unbias News or Hostwriter. And that is because of how we've been able to tell the stories of people from my constituents, from the Middle East, Southeast Asia, Africans. That is how we're reported. And it informs the agenda of the newsrooms in this, I don't want to mention names. I'm sure we already know them, right? And it forms how these stories are being told, and the nuance is taken off. For my country, I'm Nigerian, we've been separated between the Muslim North and the Christian South. That's how our story is being told. And that's what the world knows. But that's not the truth. We're not between the Muslim North and the Christian South. So when you now insist that how about we add nuance to the story so it gets clear, they say, no, I have been clearly told that this is not why we're here. And I quote the editor who said that to me. This is not why we're here. So why are you here? Right? So to say in a way as though we don't know why this is done, it's out of place. Some media in the US, for instance, gets into a particular country and is interested in what GE is doing and what the contractors are doing. It's about the interest of the states. that they serve. It's not about the interests of the communities. So the extraction is, they have not stopped the extraction even from the colonial area. The extraction is still ongoing. So they keep taking off. So when your contractors are sent there, you start, your interest is about the contractors, not about the people, not about what concerns them. And which is why when people talk about polarization, I laugh about it, because it drove us to where we are. If my community is not represented in the news you cover, how do I trust you? So when you ask people, I stay in Germany now and I pay my taxes to the ADR, ask me again, do you listen to the radio? Where you pay your taxes, are you represented? No, I'm not. I'm not. Do I depend on the news to consume the news from the channels? No, I'm not. Because my story is not being told. The only time I am projected in these platforms is when crime is being told. 1st of January this year, Berlin was up in flames. But guess what? The political elites in Germany said it was migrants, black people, people of color. They are the ones burning down Berlin. I was probably in my house sleeping and trying to hide from the crackers. But in a way, I've also been labeled. So when you see me at the train station, you're like, that's them. So it has influenced how we are seen and how we're projected. To say that editors and journalists are not aware of it, no, they are aware. It's intentional. It's deliberate. It was meant to be so.
Thank you, Mercy. Wafaa, I want to build upon that response and ask you, I was talking to a European colleague of mine, and they report a lot on the Global South. And they were sharing that when there's an effort to pitch those stories about the Global South to media here in Europe, or even in the US for that matter, sometimes the response is it is not relevant, or there is a demand for that victim narrative, like do you have pictures of people crying, etc. How do you tackle this?
Let me use this metaphor. I think in these cases, the international media are in a narcissistic relationship with the journalists and the media in the Global South. Because what they are doing is they love bomb us when they need us, when there's a trend, and then they abandon us and pretend that they don't see us and we are totally irrelevant. That happened when the Arab Spring happened in the beginning, Syria, Tunisia, Egypt, and so on. How many news we see now about Yemen, talking about power dynamics, who's controlling the news and who's telling the stories about which country. How many stories we have seen before about Sudan. It's all in the hands of the mostly white male editor in the international newsroom. They are setting, unfortunately, the tone. They are constructing the narrative that we must follow. It's very hard for us to set our narrative. And we are almost called always crazy, not realistic, not tackling the good story. They always know better. They know always what is relevant and not relevant for them. And actually, this is proven wrong by many cases, including the social media, because you can see now, even on Twitch, there are some news channels everywhere, YouTube, Twitch, and these very not journalistically trained influencers are actually tackling some stories that the mainstream media is not tackling. But the problem is the mainstream media are having the money, are having the power, and they are blocking the other media from reaching. Now we are also in another extracting way, like I like social media and I like it as a channel of distribution of our work in journalism, but I don't like the way that all the mainstream media now is saying, okay, we are laying off journalists, veteran journalists who have been working since years and they have great experience to make it more digital. Great, go there. We are now talking even AI, it's even farther, and we are going all there. We have to. It's not by choice. But again, extracting the knowledge and excluding these expertise from the next and the future conversation is not helping anyone, especially those who are working in the global south, because it's, again, it's very important to have diversity. And I feel also, again, another metaphor. I always feel that we are in a diversity trap, right? Like a tourist trap. They are convincing us that we are doing diversity for your benefits. We are putting diversity on the agenda. We are spending money on diversity. We are doing this and that for diversity in the content and in the representation in newsroom, etc. But we have turned to be accessories, even less than tokens. Like in the last few years, we were tokens, so we were given a little bit of maybe a voice on the table, yeah, maybe. But now it doesn't even matter anymore. They just put our photos somewhere and they put us on their websites, and the accessories are done. We are having a diverse team. Good work. Yeah. So it's a mix of many factors, and I would say before we demand that the mainstream media, the international media, our editors, our journalists, to learn how to be truly diverse, I think we need to ask them first to de-learn how they implement these biases in the newsroom, consciously, subconsciously. Personally, I had this talk 5 years ago. I don't care anymore, right? They need to do their homework and to find out this, and they need to de-learn that.
My favorite diversity photos are the university admission brochures. I mean, it's great actually, but not everything translates to the same inside. Tina, Unbiased News has published a bunch of stories on extractive practices. There's a whole book, Unbiased News, on it. What has been the audience's response, and what is your method of keeping yourself accountable to your mission? What has been your method of self-reflection about, whether Unbiased News has been doing the things it set out to do?
Yeah, I mean, there's been great response to the book. There's been, and by the way, it's still available to purchase at Corrective. We published it together with Corrective in German and in English. It's only available from us. Oh, no, it's only available from us. I'm so sorry. Unlearned that. But, for us, it was a huge thing because basically, as I mentioned, we have this journalism network. We're trying to encourage people to collaborate, but we're noticing it's not always working. There's problems. We hook people up together to work. The collaboration doesn't work, or we hook them up with newsrooms. It doesn't work. What's the deal? So we asked for people from all over the world to submit stories about what is the barriers to diversity in their country, or in their culture, or among them, in their city, whatever. And we got a lot of different stories, also about, not having access to internet in different places, not being paid the same as other people, sexual harassment. Tanya Pampaloni, who's here in the audience right now, wrote a really great piece about the English barrier, how someone who speaks great English and maybe speaks, as a second or third language or even a first language, if it's not the kind of English that is spoken in the majority countries, then it's automatically considered like too much work. When we all know actually as editors that this is not the main problem when you're editing, right? But we took the learnings from this book and we turned it into our editorial manifesto. And us here together with Purple Romero from the Philippines, who is not able to be with us today, were sitting trying to think of what kind of editorial manifesto do we need to have to not replicate these same practices. And you can find it on our website, unbiasednews.org, our complete editorial manifesto. But just to highlight two things I think is really important is that we agreed to not amplify bias and prejudices. That means not going for the easy framing of a story without considering what that might say about that community. And another big one was to present also people who are victims of things with agency and dignity as a default. And that was brought up by us because we shared stories that we loved and hated from the international media, and what were the things that were also in common with these pieces. And one thing that we all agreed that we really hate is when you give someone a sort of positioning for their sob story, more or less. Never give any idea of how this problem that they're following is more systematic, not just them. What kind of people are responsible for putting them in this situation, but just tell the horrible story of the horrible thing that happened to this person, not situate them within the context of the structures that put them in that situation, and not give them the voice for what they would like to do differently, what they would have had done differently for them. So we said we're not going to do stories like that. And so because we have this editorial manifesto, it's one of the things when we get pitches, when we get stories, that we all hold ourselves accountable to is to look at, does this piece amplify prejudice and bias against somebody? Does this piece present the victims with agency and dignity? And this is part of our editorial process that we ask the authors then to work with us on. So it's not just that we're proofreading and we're trying to make the story snappier and this and that, but that we're also saying, go back and ask that person again, what would they have done differently? What were the structures that they think are in place that put them in this situation in the first place? Can you find out more information about whether there would be, what would be the way to get out of this, or who would be responsible? And to really have that in the story, because we think that this is one of the things that marks extractive media practices, is telling a story basically for the benefit of the reader and the benefit of the author, where you go, oh, that's terrible, look at what just happened there, oh man, and you flip the thing. The person who the story is about doesn't benefit, and if you would think, can I do something to change this? The story doesn't have the information about it. The story doesn't tell you what would needed to be changed to take this person out of this situation. I think we all saw it with coverage of the Pakistan floods, where it was, oh, this horrible thing is, and look, this person lost their home, and blah, 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 but very, very little about what led to this. Why is Pakistan, who's one of the world's least emitting countries, in a situation where it has one of the biggest responses from climate change, not giving the structure and the context and the things that you would need to know in order to be able to do something to change things.
And you brought out a report, an annual report on diversity, which talked about which countries we are still missing covering. How did you think of that?
Right. So we also had pledged when we started Unbias the News that we are also going to be really transparent about our own diversity and also have a look at what biases we have after 1 year of publishing. So that report is available on our website from our first year of publication, where we look at, we are a small newsroom, we can't get everywhere, but we looked at, did we have special focus on some countries but not others? What were we missing? Did we try to represent different communities, like the LGBT community? Did we try to represent the elderly and the young? So what areas after 1 year did we kind of automatically gravitate towards, and which ones were we missing out on, so that we could keep that in mind for changing in the next year? So we think that that's better than just talking about, what is the racial makeup of our newsroom. We have those stats there as well. But to also think about what kind of stories do we do that we find easier to do, that we obviously kind of like doing, and which stories did we find more difficult, so that we can focus the next time to diversify in that way as well, to tell the stories that we were missing.
Mercy, Wafaa, do you want to add anything pertinent that we missed discussing before I open the floor to the audience?
Yeah, I just think that it's important that, across the world we prioritize communities in our reportage, because that's the constituents that has been left out, and more priority should be placed on the privileged communities as well, because we are now we're carried away by influential political elites and deep pocket oligarchs. These are the people that make our headlines. These are the people that are trending. These are the people that, we're all running after and running to break the news, and the communities have completely been ignored. What are we doing? What is the essence of journalism? What is the sole function? Why are we here? If we are going to keep running after deep pockets, elites, and the big guys, we have no business doing this. Let's just go home. Let's shut the doors. Let's go do full-blown PR. I think that's something we should take home.
Yeah, finally, maybe I want to add that double standards are hurting everyone in journalism. We have seen the coverage for Syria war and Ukraine war. Everyone was amazed how the newsroom got ready very fast for covering the Ukrainian war when it happened. However, the attacker was the same in the Syria war. No one really got ready or offered the journalists who are working. Myself, I had also this experience. No one offered me while looking into the footage of the chemical attacks of Syria. No one offered me back then any psychological support or emotional support while this happened so fast in covering Ukraine. So I'm just hoping that we call out these double standards in our newsrooms when we find it, and we focus on the story, on the importance of the story, be truly independent journalists. We don't follow any agendas of any political party or any country's agenda. We just do our work in a very independent way, and I think we have been talking a lot about our independency, but when it comes to application, we are imprisoned into the agendas of our organizations.
Okay, in the interest of keeping ourselves accountable to the audience, please, could a mic be here? Thank you.
So much for that talk. It was very insightful and resonated a lot with like some of the experiences that I have.
Please make it closer.
My question is really, I hope is beneficial for the rest of the room as well, but it is a personal thing. I find myself as a sort of diversity hire, but in a very well-intentioned newsroom, and I'm outnumbered by a very particular demographic and the UK. And sometimes it feels like a tug of war trying to get the right framing or the right stories through. And I was just hoping if you guys had any tips for someone. Sometimes it's self-doubt because you don't have enough experience and you've just started off. And I've only been a year, a journalist for a year now. And I'm causing a lot of discomfort, because trying to undo years or even decades of thought processes or ways of doing things. And sometimes it's like, is it because I'm inexperienced, or am I being too particular or too pedantic, or am I picking on something that doesn't need to be picked on, or is this okay in terms of editorialization? So how do you kind of combat that, doubt, the sort of imposter syndrome, I guess, but then also try and bring about that change in a newsroom, and that something is outrightly problematic sometimes, or because it can get into the nitty-gritty of things as well, right? Very, very particular details of maybe describing someone's accent as for editorialization, and I'm like, that's a problem, and then they're like, no, that's interesting. But yeah, just your thoughts and insight into that.
Yeah, well, I think we should set a club for imposter syndrome women journalists. We were just talking about this also in the event of the European Press Prize with other colleagues. We women, especially from diverse backgrounds, we tend to underestimate ourselves, and I do this also often. But I have a great team here who are pushing me all the time, yes, you can do this, and I do the same to them. So first advice, before you go into this path, please surround yourself by people who are like-minded, and they are pushing you to learn. Everything comes by experience, and everything comes by, learning by doing is the best. I wrote an article, I don't know if we can show it here or not, about the class in journalism, but I wasn't only talking about the class, it was also talking about learning English and languages in general, even as a second generation or as an immigrant, and being labeled because of your accent, because your grammar mistakes in English, etc. It is the dynamics, right? And being a diversity hire doesn't make you any less than anyone who is working there. I guess we should take. They always think that they are giving us a chair on the table, right? But it's actually our chair. No one gave it to us. It's our chair, and we deserve this chair. So when you are sitting on this chair on the table, believe it's your chair. No one has given this to you. It's not a chance that they give to you. Actually, they need you. So just do it like this, and I think we all deserve chances. These are chances to learn our profession in the best way we can.
Actually, I used to think like that in the beginning, wonder about it, and now I feel like it doesn't matter. I'm going to get in, and I'm going to take my space, and I'm not here to fit in. So I will make the space wider, get more people like me into the space, so put it to the best use. It doesn't matter what is anyone's intent, but yeah, I'm going to take my space.
If I could just add really quickly, too, it's not entirely your responsibility, right? And the number one question that we get asked by people who are in the majority at newsrooms is, how can I help that we increase the diversity, that the young people that are coming in, that they can change things? So there are other people around that maybe want to do things, and if you're one of those people, then you should be listening to this comment and thinking, okay, how could I make her feel more comfortable? What can I do to put those changes in and to listen to the new people that come into my newsroom about what dynamics and hierarchies could be adjusted or changed to make things better, and not scoff when you bring up important points like actually describing someone's accent is a little bit problematic, and not go, this is how we always do it, it's fine. Listen to the new people that are coming in, they have a lot to bring.
Question here. And then here.
Hi. The thing that you said about how sometimes news editors will say, oh, but if we fly someone in, they won't be biased. It's something that I've heard before. But now I obviously think that people obviously will have their biases. But what would you say, let's say the next time that we hear an editor say, no, but if we fly someone in, they'll be unbiased, rather than getting someone on the ground? What would be your response to that, as a practical tip? Does that make any sense?
I think she's asking whether the...
No, what I'm asking is that it's something that we've probably all heard, where someone say, oh, we can fly someone in, they won't be biased. How do you challenge that? What response would you give the next time we hear someone say that?
I think the first response is, why is a lack of context unbiased, right? Like, someone who lives there and has the context, yeah, they have a bias. Someone with no context is also a bias, right? Not knowing anything about the country that you're going to report on is a bias too. It means you're going to be susceptible to the first person you meet telling you, this is how it is here, now you get it. It's not, we also know that journalists don't really think that, because you also send the same people from American or British newsrooms over and over to the same regions, because they're experts on those regions now, right? So if they really thought that not knowing anything about it makes you less biased, then they wouldn't continue to do that, right? Because obviously that person who's already been there is also infected then by the bias. It just doesn't make any sense.
There is also another notion to consider anyone who's could be emotionally connected or having something with empathy towards any place that this journalist would be biased. However, actually, from experience, management, editorial processes, and reporting with empathy have shown that it's even better when you do it and you know the communities that you are reporting about. You have a background that is a match, or you can understand why they are doing certain things. I think also a good example from that, the story from Nigeria about the vaccination. There were a vaccination hesitance in Nigeria, and in that time everyone was reporting about the anti-vaxxers and the evil anti-vaxxers everywhere in the world. And this place in Nigeria, they had a reason. Only their community knew that they faced, their kids suffered from...
Yeah, maybe I should just...
Please, yes, continue.
I should probably just take that up. I think that, at the peak of the COVID pandemic, where everyone was screaming and the media was all up in arms, probably blocking off those who say, we do not want to take the vaccine, without asking why. And, if you infer in any way or act as though the vaccine is a concern, they just block you out. There's a media completely blackout on these persons. We thought we took a step back. We had to, at the time where we called in for pitches, and I think that was one of our first stories on vaccine hesitancy. And what that story did for us is that in Kano State, in the northern part of the country, in 1996, Pfizer had a trial in this community. About 30 children were affected. Some died. Some, are still physically challenged. To this day, they're about 20, my math is so rusty, 26 years now. And we thought, Pfizer is administering vaccines again. And these communities are expected to roll their sleeves, go line up and take the vaccine without asking questions. And it was important that we needed to spotlight communities that had legitimate concerns about the vaccine. And this was a story that needed to be told. And, you can see within this lens that their concern was valid. We have lived experiences around this vaccine, and you do not expect us not to ask questions and just go take the vaccine. And we really spotlight this community. We had to speak to mothers that, at the time thought that Pfizer was honestly and legitimately administering vaccine. Unknown to them, it was a trial version, and it affected their kids, And for us, I think that story was important because while everyone was screaming and there was panic, there was fear, we step back to look at the other angle to the story. So oftentimes when people are saying no to something, beyond complete media blackouts to some communities, we need to take a step back to start asking why are they saying no, and just listen. And I think we're all screaming at the same time, and we're not hearing ourselves, even in the newsrooms. And I think that's what Wafaa was trying to say. We're able to empathize and report the story in a way where, number one, the community was seen, and it was a journalist that was resident in Kano that did file the story, and he reported it from a place of, this is a community, this is what they've seen, this is what they've experienced, and it was important that this story needed to be told in a way that we're not accusing you, or we're not saying that, oh, you're ignorant, or you're from this part of the constituents of these communities that are rejecting the vaccine, or labeling. There was a lot of labeling to the anti-vaxxers, right? Rather, we just said, let's see them, let's look at their story and allow them say these things and that concerns them with their own voices, rather than sitting back and reinterpreting what we think we've heard from them.
But by the way, that also wasn't our idea, right? It was pitched to us by locals from the area. So again, you can't be expected to know everything about every region in the world and every intricacy and every context, and you shouldn't. That's not what we should be doing in journalism, is assuming that we're all able to do that. That's why you work with a diversity of different people. That's why you work with people from different backgrounds, from different countries, from different histories, is so that you don't have to be expected to know everything, that everyone in the newsroom brings in what they can. And these people, with that special context from Kano State, brought to our attention something that there's no way we could have known about otherwise. I mean, I guess we could have figured it out one day or another, but not without that being brought to our attention.
And no one can just fly from somewhere to Kano to tell the story.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
Yeah. We have 3 minutes, so quick question, answers, quick answers. And the panelists would be around, so please, the rest of the questions we can do later.
I'd like to comment on two things that pop me up. That is, I'm from Portugal, so a country with a very strong colonial past. English language barrier. Why do we call it a barrier, and we don't call a barrier when we go to a country and we don't know how to speak the languages that people are talking there? Mm-hmm. And the other one is always when we talk about African journalists who are coming to Europe, we always talk about learning experiences. But why don't they have the right to come here and to report about us and to give another eye about us? And the last thing is, every time I want to, I do a lot of reportage in Guinea-Bissau, and every time I want to get funds, I'm forced to put on the budget that I will pay half of the money to the journalists who are working there with me. And how can we change it? Because it's very unfair, because when we go there, if Guinean people wants to live the same way I live there, they need to have the same money I have.
2 minutes, so one sentence each. Go.
I just think that, the first two questions, in a way, she was smiling, so she responded to it herself. The last one, I think for us, we pay equally. We try to ensure that happens. We don't care if you're reporting from Bangladesh, and with all respect to everyone from Bangladesh, or you're living in Manhattan, or you're in DC area, we pay you the same. And we decided to ensure that beyond, it was a structural issue that we needed to address. So we try to ensure we do that at Unbias News, and we hope that more newsrooms can adopt that system.
And the bank fees.
And we take out the bank fees as well. We've had cases where, I have had a situation where I filed a story and it took me more than 6 months to get paid. Can you imagine that for a freelancer? You're distressed, you're confused, you don't know what to do. nobody wants to pay you on time. But we try to ensure, and thanks to VT, I need to make a shout out to her. VT is, is our account officer. She just left us for something else, but not because we don't pay her well, for personal, family reasons. But VT has always showed up on time to ensure that all the freelancers most of them even get paid before they start filing the stories, because we understand the logistical bottlenecks that happens as well. So yes, we do make sure that we get that area right.
Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you to the audience. 5 years of having this conversation, more and more people showing up. So I hope that's a good sign, and that's where we leave.
I just want to say thank you to Zoe and Franca, my lovely daughter, and they've been great.